All right, so this is video 4. Like I said, I don't know if I'm going to keep numbering them like this, but uh, this video is about how to source a document. And so what we're going to do in this video is look at a few documents with a historical eye. So we're going to look at these documents, how a historian might look at them to try to get some extra information out of it rather than just what we see in the written source or the visual source. So this is one of the most important skills that a historian has, because most of what historians do is looking at sources and telling a story based on those sources. So what we're going to do when we source a document is we have to use the facts that we know to make educated statements. I won't even call them guesses. We're going to use facts to make educated statements about what we've read. And we call these inferences. So what we're going to be practicing is how to make an inference. These are educated statements based on facts. So again, the facts that we're basing these statements on are the ones we talked about in video 2 about the Neolithic or the Paleolithic and the Neolithic societies. So what kinds of inferences are we going to be making? There are 4 types. Point of view, which we've already kind of mentioned. Historical situation. Purpose. And audience. Don't worry, we will explain what all of these are for. But one thing I want you to keep in mind, regardless of what kind of thing it is, remember, we've got to think about the author. All of this stuff refers back to the author of the thing. Now, the author of the thing is really easy when it's written. When it's written, it's just the person who wrote it. When it's visual, it's the person who created it. The people or the person who made it. I'm going to repeat myself a couple of times here. It is not the photographer. So if I ever show you a picture of a building or a picture of a sculpture, the author is not the person who took the picture. The author is the person who made the thing. Okay? So if I see any work that cites the photographer as the author of the thing, well, we're going to have a conversation about that. All right, so To get at these types of inferences, we're going to answer very simple questions. So these are questions that you're probably very familiar with. These are questions that you probably played around with since elementary school. So the first question is, what is the main idea? What is the main idea of the thing you just wrote or the thing you're looking at? What's the main idea? The next one. Who created this? And I don't want the name. So think about it like this. Is this person famous? If so, for what? If not, what kind of person is this? What kind of person is this? Rich, poor, urban, rural. What might those things say about this person? So what might those characteristics say about the author if they were rich or if they were poor? Or to refer back to the first video we made, what if they were American or what if they were British? Or what if they were French? How would that change the story? So who created this? The name is not important. If the only thing you tell me is the name of the author, you haven't told me the whole story. In fact, you haven't told me any of the story. This stuff is the story. The name is maybe 5%. I want to know this stuff. Okay, this is your point of view. That's what this is. This is your point of view. Okay, next one. When was this document or this thing created? When was this source made? And again, just like with the who, I don't want to know just the date. The date is maybe 5% of this. Is the date significant? If so, for what? If not, what's going on in the world at that time? What's going on in the region at that time? Again, the date is not significant. What is significant is what's going on in the world at that time. So if you just tell me the date, that's maybe 5% of the story. This is what we want. Okay, next one. So we've got who, what, when, where. Where was this source made? Is this place significant? If so, for what? Now, these two questions, when and where, we're going to put them together, and that gives us our historical situation. This is also known as the context for the document. What's going on around this document to cause it to be written? Okay, next up. You've got who, what, when, where, why was this source made? What's the purpose? What is the author trying to accomplish by making this? What is the author trying to accomplish by making this thing? This is the one where you have the most freedom to kind of guess. And when we look at a couple examples of this, you'll see how we're able to guess. And we're not looking for right answers here, we're looking for plausible answers. If you can make a good case for why this was made, that's what we're looking for. And then finally, the last one, to whom was this made for? To whom was this created for? Who's this for? Who is the author writing to? Are they famous? Or significant? If so, for what? If not, what can the audience do or not do to help the author? So why, I should have put this up here when we were talking about why, that's the purpose. The to whom, this is our audience. These are simple questions. You've been playing around with these questions since elementary school. All we're going to do now is apply them to a primary source. That's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put we're going to practice with a few sources right here. These refer back to our stuff about Paleolithic and Neolithic societies. We're going to do a couple of written sources, and we're going to do a visual source, but they all refer back to the stuff we've been covering in the past couple of videos. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to put this source up here. This is Hammurabi's code. I'd like you to pause it and read the source. I'm going to assume that you've paused it now, and I'm going to keep going. So at this point, you should have read the source, and we'll work through now these questions to get a better idea of what Hammurabi's code is all about. So every source that you see will have a line of attribution. It'll tell you a little bit of background information about the source so that you have enough to go on to build your inferences. So this is Hammurabi's code. Hammurabi's code is a Babylonian, which is in modern-day Iraq. So it's a Babylonian set of laws written around 1700 BCE. So right in the middle of the agricultural revolution, we have now started moving into cities. And it was written by Hammurabi, the king of Babylon. That is the author. Although he probably didn't physically write it himself, he probably had somebody write it down for him, but he's the author. So every source you have will have this kind of background knowledge for you to kind of give you something to hone in on. All right, so let's go through the questions. What's the main idea? Normally the main idea is, pretty apparent. You can normally get it from the line of attribution here. But the main idea is that we want to have rules for an orderly society. Orderly societies need rules, and these are the rules for this society. If we read a little closer, you might notice that there are some different laws for different types of people. And so we see that rich people, who here are known as patricians, have different laws than poor people. Who are known as plebeians. And that's pretty much what we get here. There's also a little hint of patriarchy in the bottom part of this, which is why I included it so that you could see patriarchy in action. Okay, so that's the main idea. That's pretty much what this says. But now we got to dig a little deeper. Who wrote this? So who wrote this? Well, Hammurabi wrote it. But remember, that is not nearly the end of the story. Who was Hammurabi? All right, Hammurabi was the king. And why does that matter? Well, only kings can make laws. And the king probably knows all the problems in his society. Why? Because he probably gets complained to about them all the time. See how that goes farther than just telling me that it was Hammurabi or just that he was a king? We need to know what's the deal with kings? Why do we care that a king wrote this? Okay, moving on. When was this written? So we know it was written in the 1700s BCE. Remember, but that's not the whole story. I don't just care about the date. We know at this time, this is when agriculture has taken over from hunting and gathering. We know also that that leads to the creation of wealth and the creation of cities and the specialization of labor. All right. Next up, where? So we know this was written probably in Babylon. It doesn't say so for certain, but it's the capital, and the king lives in the capital, so probably Babylon, which you've got to imagine is one of the largest cities in the world at the time, which means that these laws will be seen by the most people. And the most influential people. That gives us our context. All right, 2 more questions. Why? Now, I said earlier that this might be the one that gives you the most freedom to play around with. So let's assume why Hammurabi wanted to write these laws down. So what's the purpose of laws in general? Laws prevent behavior that we don't want. And a lot of what we see when we read Hammurabi's code here is about violence. We've got sons striking fathers, knocking people's eyes out, breaking people's limbs, knocking people's teeth out. We've got men hitting women and causing miscarriages. I mean, this is all really violent stuff. And so what Hammurabi presumably is trying to do is trying to prevent violent behavior. It seems like it happens a lot. Otherwise, there wouldn't need to be laws for it. So this seems to happen quite a bit. We can also see a couple of other purposes in there, in that he wants to reinforce patriarchy. Down here at the bottom, when he says, whether or not the woman is rich or poor, if you cause a miscarriage, then that's worth 10 or 5 shekels of silver. Women have prices. And that's a very patriarchal idea. It also reinforces the idea that rich people have more value. In Hammurabi's eyes, rich people are more valuable than poor people. That's why the punishments for hitting or killing a rich person are much worse. So why does Hammurabi want to keep the rich people on his side? Well, that's a pretty easy one. They pay taxes. And Hammurabi likes money. Okay, last question. The last question here. The audience. To whom? So the answer to this one is pretty easy. It's written to all the Babylonians, all the people of the Babylonian Empire. Although he may be singling out the rich people, mostly because he wants to keep them happy, and they're probably the ones who are most likely to be able to read. But these laws apply to everybody, so the audience is everybody. Okay, let's look at another source. So I'm going to switch to a different sheet of paper because I've used this one up. So if you need to finish, pause it. I'm going to switch to a different page right now. And we're going to look at another source, which is another set of laws. This one you might have heard of. It's called the Ten Commandments. Now, again, like we did with Hammurabi's code, pause it. I'd just like you to read the underlined portions. So pause it. I'm going to assume that you have paused it. And now I'm going to answer the same questions we just did, but with the Ten Commandments. Okay, so again, for the Ten Commandments, I'm going to give you the line of attribution. These are the laws of the ancient Hebrews. And in the historical record, this was written sometime, most historians seem to agree, somewhere in that range this was written. We don't know for certain. And the author here, so this was, for our purposes, we're going to say that this was written by Moses, who was a leader of the ancient Hebrews. Now, according to the Bible, it says that Moses received the Ten Commandments from God, but since this is a history class and not a religion class, we're going to say they were written by Moses and said they came from God. This in no way is meant to diminish or make light of a religious tradition, but for historical purposes, that's what we're going to say. All right, so what's the main idea? So what's the main idea? Again, it's your basic stuff. Basic laws. So don't steal, kill, don't want what you can't have. Don't want what you can't have. You know, basic stuff. Don't steal, don't kill, don't be a jerk. There's another important main idea here that we will get to more as we delve deeper into this, but the other main idea is the idea of monotheism. The idea that we have one God. That's what the Ten Commandments are saying. Don't steal, don't kill, don't want stuff that you can't have. And we have one God. Okay, now, who is the author? We've kind of covered that already. Moses. So he is the leader of a nomadic people, the Hebrews, who are very poor. Leader of a nomadic people. They're very poor. They're nomadic, so that means they move around. It's also probably pretty important to reiterate the point that these people are very poor. It probably also doesn't hurt to say that they're moving around a desert. So they don't have much, and there's not much around them. Even today, the desert where they are wandering around in the Sinai Peninsula is still pretty barren. This is not a good place to be wandering around. All right, when was this written? Well, pretty much the same time as Hammurabi's code, more or less. So it's written kind of at the same time as Hammurabi's code. So we've got agriculture has replaced hunting and gathering. And so it would be very difficult for a nomadic group to survive without agriculture. Or if we want to think about this a different way, Hammurabi's code is written at a time or in a place where agriculture is taking over. And this is written from the perspective of people who don't have agriculture. Hammurabi is written from the point of view of someone who has everything. This is written from the point of view of people who have nothing. So I've kind of already answered this where question. So traditionally, this is written at Mount Sinai. So that's what it says in the religious tradition. Mount Sinai doesn't actually have a geographic location. It's somewhere on the Sinai Peninsula. But this is a very, it's a very deserted desert. There's not much there. Now, let's think about why this was written. Let's think about the purpose. Let's think about the purpose of why this would be written. These people can only rely on themselves. These people can only rely on themselves. They have no one else to depend on. They have no city to live in. They have very meager food and water supplies. So they really only have themselves. For defense, for survival, that's it. These people can only rely on themselves. So they can't have disputes within their group. They can't have disputes over stealing stuff. They can't have disputes over, taking someone's wife. They have to rely on themselves. These rules are there to keep this group together. Now, that applies to the basic laws stuff, right? The don't steal, don't kill, don't want what you can't have. But it also applies to the monotheism. Monotheism is our team, the team of these people. It's what unites us. That's why that stuff comes first. Those are the first commandments. We have to unite us first. The other stuff is there to keep us united. But we have to be united first. Now, next question, last question. Whom? Who's the audience? It's written to all the Hebrews. It's written to all the Hebrews. But probably just the men. And then probably just the heads of the families. Like, these are laws that everybody has to abide by. But there's not much in there about, women stealing other people's husbands. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. It doesn't say the opposite. So it's probably just the men that Moses is talking to here. So when we're done with this, we've now looked at two different sets of law codes. So now what we could do is we could compare them. We could now compare these law codes. And we're not going to do that now, But we could now answer questions like, how do law codes differ between rich and poor societies? What kinds of similarities and differences could we say? Well, one similarity that seems to be staring us right in the face is that they're both very patriarchal. One difference we could say is that the Hebrews are very general in their laws. Don't kill people. Don't lie. Hammurabi is very specific. We're talking about specific types of violence we want to prevent. Why does that difference happen? Well, Hammurabi is in a settled society where they can worry about those things. Moses is just trying to keep everybody together, trying to keep everybody alive. Okay, so one last source to look at, and this is a visual source, and this is going to take us back to Paleolithic time. So this is a visual source. This is a small stone sculpture called the Venus of Willendorf. So again, like the other ones, we're going to do a little bit of attribution. The Venus of Willendorf. So the Venus of Willendorf is a small limestone sculpture of a woman with exaggerated fertility features. And archaeological evidence points this to be created around 23,000 BCE. So right in the middle of the hunting and gathering period, this sculpture was made. Now, when we look at a visual source, there's less to go on. So we have to kind of make some more inferences here. For the what, there's not much more than what the line of attribution tells us. The main idea, that's it. You don't really have to go beyond that for a visual source. Sometimes you might, but typically you'll get enough of the main idea from the line of attribution. Who is the author? So who made this? Don't know. It's unknown. But we do know that hunting and gathering societies had time for leisure activities, like sculpting. We also know that this guy or gal, we don't know, this person, was good enough at hunting and gathering to have survived to have leisure time. All right, next. When? So we know 23,000 BCE. We know that this was the height of hunting and gathering societies. Where? Well, it doesn't really matter, but it was found in Willendorf, which is in Austria. This doesn't really help us, so there's not much we can say about that. Most of the world looked pretty much the same in terms of societies. Austria is really not going to be any different than Africa or China or South America. It doesn't really matter for our purposes here. Why was this created? Well, what most historians seem to think is that the creator of this sculpture made a connection between women's fertility and nature's fertility. Kind of thinking about this like the idea of Mother Nature. And maybe taking that idea further, started to worship nature to ensure plenty of food. Again, we're just looking for plausible purposes. That makes sense. So that's what we're going for. It's not the only plausible thing, but that's a plausible reason. Last question, to whom? Well, one possibility might be other people. To get them to worship nature. 2, more people worshiping nature might mean that we get more food. It might also be Mother Nature herself. That might be who this is for. Again, with the purpose being to do that. Now, again, we could compare this source with another source. So, for example, we could say something like, how did societies change between the time of Hammurabi's Code and the Venus of Willendorf? Actually, we should probably switch those. So how did societies change between the time of the Venus of Willendorf and Hammurabi's Code? So what kinds of continuities and changes? And again, we're not going to focus on that for right now, but those are the types of questions that we can answer now by sourcing these documents. So I'm going to stop there. This is Mr. Nissen signing off.